Hello and welcome. This channel is for learning about the New Testament in its original language, Koine Greek, and this video is specifically looking at the future tense in its main active and indicative forms that we find it in the New Testament. The future tense in Koine Greek covers things that are yet to happen, things that are going to happen further on in the timeline of events. For this, we add a sigma augment at the end of the stem and before the ending. The aspect is undefined in as much as we don't know, generally speaking, whether it's going to be an ongoing process or a one-off event that occurs in the future, whether it's something with continuity or progression, or whether it's simply something that happens once. We'll work that out from the context and the type of verb being used. That's often inferred. That's something to think about when you're translating. But the future tense will look at the things yet to come. It's not hugely common. It only occurs in the indicative mood. So there's no imperatives, infinitives, subjunctives or participles in the New Testament. Although if you are looking at Koine Greek for other reasons, such as reading the Septuagint or other classical Greek texts, you might find that there are some there. But for this video, I'm just going to cover the Bible. As with the other tenses, we're going to use luo as our exemplar to give an example of how this verb declines. So it's a very simple word, and these are simple examples of what adding the sigma augment before the ending at the end of the stem will look like. So we have luso, luses and luse in the singular, lusomen, luseta and lususin. These verbs are about loosing or setting free in the future tense. So I will set free, you will set free, he or she would set free. If we look at the same example with the verb to hear, akuo, I hear, it would become akuso, akuseis, for you singular here, akuse, akusomen, akuseta, akususin. The nu at the end of the third person plural will only be there if the next word begins with a vowel. Otherwise, that will end with the iota. It would be akususi, not akususin. When you come to translating this into English, or if you read an English translation of the Greek New Testament, you will see things like this for its conveyance into English. It may speak of something that is yet to come, that soon will be, when something happens or something will happen, a time will come or something is or will be coming in the future. So here's where it gets a bit more complex, and do, as ever, pause this video if you need a bit more time to focus on each point. I will go through them fairly quickly on the actual video. You might remember, if you've seen the videos about alphabets and pronunciations, that I grouped consonants by whether they were labal, palatal or lingual. That's significant because when we add the sigma augment into verbs, it will change in a number of different ways. There's certain letters that basically the Greeks didn't like to put together, and so they become the compound letters, the double consonants. So if you add a sigma, which is a sibilant S sound, anything with a hissing snake-like sound is a sibilant. If you add that to p, b or f, pi, beta or phi, it becomes psi. Psi is also a sibilant because it has that hissing sound in it, and it's going to go psi. So you've got the labial sound followed by the sibilant sound there, psi. So when we come to the palatal, also called the velar consonants, these will become a kasai. So the palatal consonants are kappa, gamma, The gamma nasal, where we have two gammas, sounds like an ng, as in angel, or angelos in Greek. The rho and chi, k sound, those will all become ksai. It's basically like adding an S to a K, ksai. Then we have the lingual consonants. If the sigma is added to that, then the sigma replaces them and that consonant will drop off. The lingual consonants are delta, theta, tau, nu, and L. Lingual ones are said towards the front of the mouth, palatal ones are said at the back of the mouth, and labial ones are said with the lips. If there is a vowel on the stem ending, then sometimes the sigma is just added, but usually what happens is the vowel is lengthened and you have a little hat or circumflex over the letter to show you that there has been a contraction in there and that sigma has disappeared and the vowel has become lengthened. Lastly, the doubling of sibilant sounds is avoided. So if you've got a zeta and you add a sigma, then that sound already there in zeta, that will drop off and you just have a sigma. If you add it to a sigma, it becomes ksai. If you add it to two sigmas, you wouldn't of course have three sigmas, so you just have one. So the few words we have where there's two sigmas in it, you remove those and replace it with one sigma. And then there are those where the stem ends with a liquid or nasal consonant. The lambda, rho, mu and nu. The sigma in this case is dropped. Instead, the accent is moved from the verb stem to the ending. This means that double consonants can become single consonants, and the location of the accent will be a clue in this case. I'm going to go through some examples of these different rules for you. Here I've quoted HellenisticGreek.com. Chapter 18, it's a good website to help you learn if you want to check out another source for your learning. The first example is pempo. I send or I appoint to do something. The pi would become a psi, so you get pempso, highlighted in blue there in the right hand future column in the yellow there. I will send or I will appoint. Ago, I lead or I bring, would become axo with the ksai in it. And peitho, which has a theta in, loses the theta, replaced by the sigma, would become peso. Here are some examples of how vowels would lengthen. Genao, meaning I give birth to, I become the father or mother of, would become geneso. Theoreo would become theoreso. So the only additions here is a sigma and a vowel lengthening. The ending hasn't otherwise changed, apart from the sigma augment and the vowel lengthening. And play-ro becomes play-roso. So the sigma goes in and the last vowel, because the stem ends in a vowel, is lengthened. And here's some examples with the sibilant consonants. Baptizo, meaning I immerse, I baptize, I dip, would become baptizo. Keruso, meaning I announce, would become keruxo, with a ksai replacing the two sigmas, because obviously you wouldn't get three sigmas in a row to put it into the future. And here we have the examples of the nasal consonants. Remember, the accent moves to the ending, comes off of the stem and onto the ending, and the double consonants will drop off with the sigma as well. They drop off. So in the first example, ballo, where you have two lambdas, one of those is going to drop off and a circumflex goes over the omega. I will throw or I will cast out, such as when the fishermen cast out their nets. Iro, I take up or I take away, would become arrow. It's lost the iota in this case. And krino, meaning I judge, stays as krino, but the acute accent has become a circumflex accent and moved to the ending and is over the omega. As I said, those were quotes from HellenisticGreek.com. It's a good website if you want to click on that and find out a bit more from there. As we move forward with verbs in Greek, one of the things that's going to become very important to you is the principal parts list. This shows you how the verbs look in each tense, and the main tenses and voices will be listed on that principal parts list for you. So it's handy to look up and see how the verbs are going to decline from there. This is a useful resource to use alongside a dictionary when you're looking up words, because quite often they will change very significantly in the way that they look, and some are actually unrecognizable from the present tense. In this case, I'm just looking at the present and the future, but we will continue to add to the principal parts list. So you'll see in future the aorist, the perfect, imperfect, passive endings and things like that. In this case, there are some verbs which do not appear in the active form, so they are quoted in the middle voice, but generally speaking we work with the present active to start with. Some verbs have active forms in the present but don't have active forms in the New Testament, at least in the future, so again I'll only be quoting the middle in that case. There's quite a few here to learn, so you might want to pause the video. I'm going to go through 24 commonly used words and show you how they change. This is going to show you a bit of some of those rules in action, and then we'll go through looking at some of them in the Bible. Ago, I lead, becomes axo, as I've said. Akuo, there's not an active form in the future. It becomes akousomai in the middle voice. Apostello, when it goes into the future, loses one of those lambdas. Remember the rules about the nasal consonants, and gains a circumflex over the omega. Still sounds like apostello, but it looks different. Watch out for the circumflex over the last letter for a clue. Grapho becomes grapso, adding a sibilant to phi. Ginomai, which is a deponent verb and only appears in the middle voice, becomes genesomai. Gnosko, which we get the word gnostic from, meaning knowledge, I know, becomes gnosomai. Again, in the middle form in the future. Didasko, I teach, becomes didaxo. And egero, I raise up, becomes egero. Again, a circumflex over the last letter. Erkomai, another deponent that's only in the middle, changes completely and becomes elusomai. Esteo, the word to eat, also changes significantly, becoming phagomai, again is only in the middle voice. Eurisko becomes euraso. Echo becomes hexo. It's gained a hard breathing there and a kasai, hexo. Kaleo becomes kaleso. That's a simple one. And keruso becomes keruxo. The verbs to call and to preach. Lambano, I take, which is used to take things on board to receive a message, such as a gospel message. So that's used both in the Gospels and in the Epistles. That becomes lempsomai in the future, and again is in the middle voice only. Luo is used as an example, would become luso. And the last of these pages here. Firstly, I've put I learn, the verb manthano. There is not an example of this going into the future tense. This is an example of something that is continuous. When you learn something, you have the knowledge, you continue to have that knowledge. So by its very nature, it is continuous. The same with the next word, I remain. It implies a degree of continuity. The present tense in Greek is continuous. It's not a single event in the present tense. We would use the aorist, which is a past tense, but it's a one-off. We would use that in the present for a one-off event. So the present tense always means something continuous. So with learning and remaining, they continue into the future. So there's no example of manthano being used actually in the future. And meno, the verb I remain, is used in that sense, but it doesn't look any different. The verb for I see, horao, where we get words like horology and horoscope from, becomes opsomai. So the rho has gained the sibilant sound to become a pasai, only in the middle voice again. So it's opsomai. And pasco, the verb to suffer. I was a bit surprised myself to find this, but it doesn't actually appear in the Bible in a future tense, so I've omitted it there. It does appear in some other texts. Pempo becomes pempso. Sozo becomes soso. Pharaoh becomes oiso, so it's totally different. And fugo, as in the word fugitive, becomes fuxomai, meaning to flee. I think it comes through Latin, I believe, but it's related to our word for fugitive, fuxomai, again in the middle voice. So let's take a look at some future tenses as examples in the Bible. Here is John 10 verse 5. I'm just going to read the whole thing out for you first so you can hear how that is. Try and follow the words and the Englishes underneath. These quotes are from Bible Hub Interlinear Bible. Allotrio de u me akolu thesusin alla fuxontai ap autu. A stranger, however, in no way they will follow. They will not follow a stranger. Talking about the sheep. Alla fuxontai ap autu, but they will flee from him. Hoti uk oidasin ton allotrion ten phonein, because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. So Handley, there were two examples of the future. This is quite common to get. Once you get one verb with a future tense, you'll get another because it's put it into what's yet to come in the timeline. Sometimes, however, they start with a future or past tense verb and then continue with a present tense, even though they're still talking about the future or the past. We do that in English as well, so don't be surprised if you see that. Follow the tenses of the verbs that precede it to know which it is in that case. So we have akolu thesusin and fuxontai. So on the left-hand side here, we have from the verb fugo, to flee. The gamma has gained a sigma, so it becomes a xi. And this ending, ontai, shows us that it is middle voice and that it's third person plural. So it becomes fuxontai. And then the other one at the top there, akoluthe susin, they will follow. It's a third person plural. Again, it's still talking about they in both contexts here. It gains a sigma before the ending. So ekolutheo, the eta is an elongation of the epsilon. Ekolutheo becomes ekoluthe, and then the susin, third person plural ending usin, with a sigma added to put it into the future tense. Let's look at another example here. Texatai dehuion kai kaleses to onoma autu Jesun. Autos gas sose ton laon autu apoton hamartion auton. In this bit we have three examples of future tense verbs. Texatai is a third person singular. Kaleses, the verb to call, is a second person singular. And sose, from the verb to save, is third person singular. Texatai has come from the verb tikto, to bear, to beget something. So it's referring to Mary giving birth to Jesus here. And the kappa tau has gained the sigma and turned into a xi. The etai bit, because it's third person singular, so texatai from tikto. Sozo becomes so say, the third person singular in the future. And kaleo becomes kalases, because it's a second person singular and future tense. And just to note there that texatai is one of those examples where it's moved into the middle voice. You might think that giving birth to a child is active, but in the future tense quite often things move into the middle. That is because it's talking about a concept of something that's going to happen, rather than talking about something that is or has already happened. So that's the future tense for you. I don't think it's massively complex. The main difficulties in learning the future tense is just remembering the different rules and a few verbs that obviously change completely in form and look entirely different. We're going to build on that principal parts list, so you'll see how verbs change quite significantly. That might seem really awkward, but it happens in lots of languages, and we do it a lot in English. People that learn English as a second language often comment on how difficult we are for doing that as well. So it's not that weird. But I'll just go over some of those rules again for you. So with pi, beta and phi, it's going to become a psi. With kappa, gamma or chi, it will become a xi. With delta, theta or tau, that consonant will drop and the sigma will replace it. Where there are vowels, sometimes the vowel is lengthened, sometimes the sigma is simply added in. And remember, lengthened vowels will often have a circumflex over them to show something has gone on there. And doubling of sibilants is avoided. So you don't add a sigma to something like a zeta. The zeta would drop off, and you don't add it to a double sigma. It would become xi. And with the nasal consonants in the future tense, lambda, roma or nu, the sigma drops off and the accent is moved from the verb stem, to the ending. This can mean that the double consonants sometimes become single consonants. Watch out for where that circumflex is at the end of the word to see that. So that was the future tense. Thanks for joining. Do check out some of the other videos. After this video, we're going to move on to the aorist. You also need to have a little look at the imperfect first. The imperfect adds the epsilon augment at the beginning, a prefix, and the future tense adds a sigma at the beginning of the word ending and at the end of the stem, so is a suffix. And the aorist does both. So it's natural to cover the imperfect and future tenses before we move on to the aorist. Even though the aorist is actually more common than both of those combined, we build up on those rules as we go along. So do check out the imperfect video, and then when you've done both imperfect and future, move on to looking at the aorist tense. We'll look also with the aorist a bit more at its middle and passive forms, because it's a very commonly used tense and comes up separately in middle and passive voices, where most tenses either don't do that, the middle looks like the passive and there's no distinction, or they just don't do it very often. So we'll focus on that a bit more with the aorist. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Do click subscribe so you can get updates, and put any comments in the comments section below.